So we're not Nestle, so I'm going to have to explain, thank you, who we are, because most of you probably have never heard of us. We are a soft drinks company, and what I'm going to try to do is to give you a kind of an explanation of our journey. So how we're trying to make ourselves into an innovation company. And I'm going to give you some concrete examples of what we do and some examples of what I've done in the past. So maybe one or two anecdotes to illustrate why we're doing what we're doing. Now, I know you're not stupid, none of you, and I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. So, but I'm hopefully going to share a little bit about our specific journey. So who is Koro? So we're a small Danish refreshment company. I'm English, I live in Copenhagen. We're about 75 years old. We're present in about 80 countries, and we serve about 3.5 billion servings of soft drinks a year, almost all over the world apart from in the Americas. And our history, and this is what Paolo was talking about, our legacy, is that we didn't really have a branded approach. We made products and then we sort of shipped them out to partners and we said, you know, maybe you'd want to sell this for us. And we've done this for quite a long time and we've been relatively successful, making a little bit of money. And the problem with that is that sometimes if the market starts to reject your product and you haven't got anything else to sell and you've not planned an innovation pipeline and you're not really listening to the consumers, then the only objective you have is to find another place to sell your products. And what we've realized is, you know, the world changes and consumers change, and and the world is a small place, so if we keep going to different countries, eventually we're going to run out of countries to go to. So we've got to do something else with our brand, and some of our brands are loved in the countries that we're in. And kind of, we do well in virgin markets. So if a market is fairly new, obviously you can launch something in there, and if it's an orange drink and there isn't one, or it's not very well developed, then probably unless you're pretty incompetent, you should be able to get some business. And then as the market starts to get established and go through its maturity curve, you need innovation in order to keep consumers engaged and to grow the market and to keep your brand relevant. And part of the questions that I was asked when I joined the company was, why do we need to innovate at all? Because, you know, we've been doing fairly okay. You know, we don't need to do much more. We've been making money every year, and, you know, we're kind of happy. And there's a number of things happening in the world at the moment, but one of the key ones is that change is really fast now. I mean, if somebody doesn't like our product and wants to put up a website or something on Facebook about us, and they're a leader, then, you know, we could lose 10, 20, 30% of our volume in one go. And so we can't respond to consumers as quickly as consumers respond to each other. And this is probably the first time in history that this has happened. And we don't want to, you know, if you go to, there's many examples on the internet of where this has kind of backfired, and you can't do anything about it. It's just that, you know, if you do happen to be Starbucks and you're in the news because you haven't paid your taxes and all the consumers decide they're going to go to Costa Coffee instead, then you've got to do something about it. You've got to do something about it very quickly. And, you know, it's not only food companies that suffer from this. You know, you don't want somebody like Jamie Oliver holding up your product and saying, you know, this has got lots of sugar in it. You really shouldn't be drinking this, because the next day people just won't buy it, and it takes you 6 to 9 months to innovate a solution. We've also got the issue with plastic and water, and you've got, you know, it's not just making products relevant, it's not just taking sugar out, but it's also making sure that you're not using too much energy, you're not using too much plastic, that you're ecological as well as healthy, and building all of this into a pipeline or a product and making sure you get it right is quite difficult. And then there's a lot of legislation and regulation. And, you know, the World Health Organization statement of sugary drinks, a major contributor to obesity and diabetes. We had a big discussion in our XCOM about this, and some people saying, well, you know, it's not proven and so on. But for me, it's quite simple. If the WHO says that's the case, it's the case. I mean, it doesn't matter really. There's no point in arguing about it. You might as well just go and do something about it because it's the case. That's the reality for consumers, and therefore there's a war on sugar, which directly affects us as a beverage company, and we have to do something about it. And on top of all of that, even if you do have good products, you're not really allowed to advertise to kids who might be a core consumer of yours. So it's pretty much a minefield in order to innovate. And in some of the countries that we're present in, and I'm sure some of your companies are present in, are maybe not so stable. And so, you know, sometimes you have boom years and sometimes you have bust years. So how do you deal with that? So we know we need to innovate, and we landed that message at Coro. And so how do we build an innovation culture and actually innovate? Maybe we don't. And what I wanted to do is to give you some examples of some of the things that we're considering or we have considered as part of our journey, and some concrete examples in terms of how we're going to address it. So one of the things that I've noticed in companies that I've worked for in the past is that there's a lot of brand protection. So you get something, it's doing really well, you want to put processes around it to protect it. You know, so we can't just have somebody running off and doing something with the brand without having some sort of check and mechanism and so on. And that kind of slows you down, but it also stops you innovating. So an example I can give you is I worked for a very big soft drinks company many years ago, and I was in R&D, I just sort of started out, and I asked for a secret ingredient. So I asked for this particular secret ingredient because I was doing some work on an ice lolly. And what happened was I made the request on a Monday, and then the request went to the United States, it went to the top of the company, it came back across to Europe, it then came back down through the president of my company to the head of R&D, and I was kind of new into R&D at the time, so, you know, and then I got called on the Tuesday morning into the office of the head of R&D, and it was a very one-way conversation, which as I remember it was him shouting at me for about 20 minutes. And so I couldn't have this particular ingredient, and the company in question felt that they were protecting their IP. But as I look back on this, and I think to myself, well, if I'd have taken that ingredient, if we'd have made a new product in a new category, and if it had been successful, you'd have a whole category which would be incremental sales, you know, carrying the company's brand forward, which would be entirely relevant for consumers. And we didn't do it just because a few people in the company believe that this is particular IP. So I've carried that with me, and it's something that we don't really want to do at Coro. The other thing is for all of the EVPs and XCOM members and people with big titles and big salaries, is that, you know, you can't have amnesia when you're setting your company direction and having meetings. So what you often hear is at the, you know, sort of September time, there'll be a meeting, and it will be, you know, well, we want to make more money, so be profitable. Everything we launch has to be margin accretive, so, you know, we're going to do it 45% margin, and if it's not, we're not going to launch it. And we want to drive volume. And then at another meeting, because there's a set of KPIs, so we'll have another meeting, and another meeting will say, right, we need to be innovative, and we need a pipeline, and we need to launch new products. Now, the problem is that if you're really innovative, then some of the stuff you launch isn't going to make the gross margin, and it's not going to make the volume, and you don't know when it is, because sometimes you just have to, like, throw it out there and see if it's going to work. And so you have a set of KPIs that are conflicting, and you have different parts of the organization that are working to different KPIs, and they find it very hard to innovate and to make a pipeline of products for launch. So we want to try to avoid this one too. Legacy was the other one. Paolo was talking about legacy. Legacy is really interesting because we have a certain way of working at Coro. We send compounds, we have a compound facility, we make emulsions, and we've got a bit of technology, we think we do. And this is kind of how we do it. So if you say you arrive at a company and you say, well, I used to work for P&G and Coke and Kraft and so on, and we could do it this way. And all the Danes look at you as, like, why would you do that? We have a factory that's making compound, that's what we do. But the reason why we haven't been able to innovate properly is because we can't get the right product at the right cost to a particular market. And so you need different business models, and you need to be flexible, and you need, as Paolo said earlier on, you need the top management to be able to support that. So if you just need to say, well, do you know what? For this one, we won't do a compound. What we'll do is we'll just make a direct beverage, and we'll solve the way that we sell it and the profit streams and so on and so forth. We'll just solve that as we go along, because this is the right way of getting the right product to the consumer. Current capability, which is one of my favorite little stories, is, and some of you may be aware of this, but the booster rockets on the space shuttle were the size that they were because they had to fit through train tunnels to get to the launch pad. And the company that built them, that was a rate limiting step in what they were doing. So they had to ship them through an existing transport mechanism. And the existing transport mechanism was the way it was because the train width was the same as a tram width, which was the same as a chariot width, which was the same as the back of two horses' arses. So I often think to myself, when I'm designing a process or I'm designing a way of working, I really don't want to be seen of as the horse's arse that came up with that particular idea. The other thing that we're trying to think of is, well, some innovation isn't intuitive. I mean, you can't go from a record to playing songs on a phone. And I remember when phones first started being suggested to play music on them, some people were saying, well, really? I mean, it's not a vinyl player, and you've got your stereo speakers, and, you sit there in front of it, and your sound quality and gold cables and all this sort of thing. Why would you want to listen to music on a phone? Which seems nuts now, but this is why it's not an intuitive innovation. So we also have to think about this. How do we look at how innovation is changing around us, which has nothing to do with our industry? It might be drone deliveries, for all we know, but we have to be developing for that in order to benefit from that technological advance. I did work for a company once. There's a few guys at the back that work for the same company. And one of the proudest things that they did was they had this 3-meter plastic poster. It was about 3 meters long, about 1 meter high. And it had the entire innovation process written down on it like this. And they were really proud of that. And so people would come in and they'd sit down and they'd say, look at this. This is our process. We have a process. And you look at it and it's beyond anybody's brain to comprehend. You go into one part and you just get completely lost. And they couldn't do anything. They couldn't launch anything. They couldn't make any decisions. They couldn't do anything quickly because they basically just strangled themselves with the process. And so I like this particular book, and I've got a slide at the back with some references for you to look at. But, a company that takes 9 months to approve a new supplier and says it wants to launch a new product in 6 is kidding itself. And a lot of companies do this. So they have you've got to fill out the supplier, and then you've got to do due diligence, and then we've got to audit them, and then obviously they've got to be financially stable, and they've got to be ethical, and then another part of the business is saying, well, we need to launch this product really quickly, we need to be agile, so we'll set up an incubator unit, because that's the way to do it. We'll operate outside of the business. But the problem with that is that inherently you're just saying, I can't innovate, so I'm going to set up maybe a little business or something out of the current day-to-day in order to innovate, because we can't do it within our current business. And for me, that's quite wrong. So that means you look at every idea as a threat. So whenever somebody comes and says, we'd like to do this, you kind of look at it as a threat. It's like, well, is it going to steal from the current brand? Is it going to dilute the margin? Is it going to mean that somewhere down the supply chain that we're shipping less efficiently, with our core products, and therefore, and there's a list of reasons why you shouldn't do these new things, which means you're not entrepreneurial. And in fact, in my mind, being corporate is the opposite, in fact, to being entrepreneurial. So our company, first of all, came up with a simple mission. What do we want to do as a business? And it was to refresh and delight our consumers, which is quite simple. If you think about it, anybody that makes anything for sale simply wants to delight a consumer. And it's not about getting a product to the consumer. That's not quite good enough. You want to delight them. Every point you touch the product, you want to delight them. But there is a tension. So there's this tension between, I want to innovate and give things to the consumers. I want to do this, but the company still has to make money. So I think sometimes a loss. So if we've launched something, and we've actually done this, we've launched something, it's making a loss, and we don't report it as a loss, we report it as an investment. It's still reported as a loss, obviously, for auditing purposes, but we talk about it as an investment. A good example of a company that I think's kind of lost its way, this will teach them not to give me free drinks when I check in. I thought I'll put them up and make them suffer in a presentation. You know, British Airways used to be brilliant. Everyone flew, the customer service was fine, you could put your luggage on, nothing was too much of a problem. Now you even have to pay for your own drinks. It's kind of like EasyJet. But this slow erosion of the consumer delight in dealing with the brand means that people that used to love the brand now don't love them anymore. And that's what we have to avoid. So brands need three things. It's quite simple. You need relevancy, you need availability, and then you need some brand love. And if you've got all of that, you will be successful. And so if you ask consumers, if you say to the consumers, well, you know, this is a product, do you love it? They may say yes, they may say no. If they were always right, no product would fail. 85%, but depending on which you look at, could be 75, 85% of product launches fail. And many big companies launch lots of things, and they go through and they spend, you know, hundreds of thousands on market research and bases 1, bases 2, and so on and so forth, and they still fail. So asking consumers doesn't really help you. And I was quite struck by this. Everybody knows these comments. Everybody knows these. Henry Ford and Steve Jobs. But what interested me was the fact that they're 100 years apart and they're still saying the same thing. And that is that if, consumers can't possibly know what they want, they can know what's available to them, and they can make a decision on if something is good or bad, and they can give you some feedback based on their experience. But if you're doing something which is really ethnographically driven, it's really behaviorally driven, then sometimes they won't know it until they see it. So I'll give you an example. I used to work for a company, made an orange drink, and we weren't doing very well. And so we asked consumers, we said to consumers, what's wrong with our product? And they gave us a list of things that are wrong with it. It's chemical, it's artificial, there's no juice in it, it's pretending to be a juice, you're conning us, it's a pig. So we sat down and we said, right, you don't want this, you don't want that. And we addressed every single thing they said to us. And we relaunched the product. We ended up with a pig wearing lipstick because the consumers didn't do anything wrong. They just answered the questions we asked them. And we didn't do anything wrong. We gave the consumers what we thought they wanted. But we gave them something that, in fact, they didn't want. They still didn't buy it. And it took something a little different to innovate that brand. And in the end, it did work. So good innovation kind of looks like this. So you've got, the personalization, you've got the silk product up there that used to be soy milk, and they simply changed its name to silk. It's not talking about what it wasn't. We're not milk, we're soy. You can have an alternative. They then turned it into a positive, and they started talking about what it was. Post-it notes we all know, Vita Coco we all know. So, how to create an innovation culture? So, the first thing is do stuff. Do lots of stuff. Engage everybody. Do workshops and semiotics and shopping safaris and don't be afraid to launch some things. If you've got the senior management on board with you, it should be quite good fun. More ideas give more ideas. So if you create an environment where people aren't afraid to give you ideas, then you'll have more ideas. Because if you see somebody's idea, it might spark something in your mind, and then your idea will spark something in theirs, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of ideas squared. So we want to create an environment where more ideas give more ideas. Employees don't care about the product. So what we tend to do, the bigger an organization gets, the more you compartmentalize. So some of you will work in departments, and you'll be doing just a little bit of the product. And some of you, I doubt probably in here, but you know, some of you will even be working in accounts. Really important and interesting area. Well, important. And if you were in accounts and your hobby was cycling, good middle-aged hobby, and you work for a soft drinks company, you're going to be in accounts, probably not too bothered about what we make. Bothered about the figures and the sales and everything, but not too bothered about what we make. If you worked for Specialized Bikes and you were an accountant doing exactly the same job, you might then have an opinion on the product. So you're much more engaged in the product. And this is what we're trying to do. So we know that what we make is maybe a bit boring. But how do we engage all the employees in the business so they actually care about the product? Once we've got all these behaviors in place, and I'll touch on what they are in a minute, you obviously need a creative and dynamic environment to create the right habitat. It's fine to say, I want everybody working together, I want you all you know, swapping desks and talking to each other around the coffee machine. But if, like in our company, you've got offices that are like 500 meters apart and you have to walk for 5 minutes to get from one side to the other, and in Denmark, the weather's not great. So, you know, when somebody does call a meeting up the top, you sometimes don't attend. Obviously, I attend all of them, if anybody is asked. And I thought what I'd do is give you an illustration. So this photo here is what used to be my office, looking out of my office on a Thursday. So you wouldn't know if it was a Sunday or a Saturday night, or indeed if there was some sort of Quentin Tarantino-esque zombie thing going on where everybody had run off and left the building. You just have no idea, would you? I mean, I'm sure there are people that have been in their offices for 20 years and maybe are pulling a salary and nobody's seen them. And that's not conducive to proper innovation. We want to go to a much more open environment, because that way you get dynamic, happy people. And then you've got to let them come in when they want, dress how they want, speak how they want, you know. And this brings me on to people and diversity. So when you're building an organization, when I go to Denmark, the Danish company is quite rightly full of Danes, which is fine. And when you look at most boards on companies, you know, and there's a big discussion about this at the moment, just in general media, is that, you know, middle-aged men in suits, blue shirts, that's more or less the makeup of 2/3 of most of our companies, the decision makers. But there's more to it than just the obvious. It's not about whether you're a man or a woman, or whether you're disabled or not, or what your ethnic background is. That's kind of obvious, because if you're doing a good job, you'll employ the right person. What you want are people that are difficult. You want people that do this. Now, those people are also the ones that are going to say, why am I filling out this expenses form? Why don't you use this app? I've done my own expenses form, which is a bit easier, or I just haven't bothered. Or why is the canteen like this? Or why do I have to come in? They're just a pain in the arse. Generally speaking, not the sort of people that you like dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So we go to great lengths as an organization. We did too, to do you know, psychometric testing, intelligence testing. Luckily, the intelligence testing stopped before I joined. And you end up with a cohort within your organization, pretty much all the same. It's not very diverse. So you want to encourage dissent and discussion and people to put their ideas forward. And of course, at some point you have to make a decision. But I want to make a decision knowing that everybody has felt that they can say whatever they want. And sometimes when you're dealing with a person, so when you go back to your environments and you think about that one person in your organization that really pisses you off, sometimes go back and think, well, actually they're quite important, because it's those people that come up with the ideas sometimes and get things done. So how am I going to incorporate them into the business? So what have we done? So what we've done is we've gathered some support from our foundation, because we're a foundation, so the board, and they're going to invest more money, because we need money to do things. So we're going to go from not very much money to 2% of net sales value spent on innovation. We've created this thing called Creators, which is not my slide, so I didn't know all this was going to happen, but nonetheless, which is Everyone in the company is a member of a group, so a department is a group. They have an innovation leader. They have meetings, they have activities in order to engage them with the product. And so we have, let's hope this one is an app. And we have a website, and we have meetings, and we have a Senate where these ideas are discussed, and they can go into our innovation process if they're good ideas. And it is driven engagement. So then we do an engagement survey. We measure if people actually like it, and it so far so good. We've got 270 odd ideas so far this year, and it's not just about the ideas. It's also about the engagement of people, because happy people want to come in a little bit earlier, and they want to work together, and they don't want to look at their watch and go home at 3 or 4 or whatever it is, you know. And they want to get engaged in the business. We've reorganized innovation, so we have a much flatter structure, something which can be expanded and gives people a career path. So something people didn't have before. You could get a degree in Denmark. The degree was being a lab tech. That's it. And so if you have a degree being a lab technician, that's your job forever. So we had some lab technicians in our business who knew tons about the product. They've been there for 25 years, knew more about the product than the scientists, because they'd seen it all before, but they didn't have a forum to be able to speak, and they could never progress up the ladder in order to use that knowledge efficiently. So they were just disengaged. So we put this in place, and we've started promoting some of the good ones. So the idea is that you start at the bottom, and you drive up through experience and mastery. So we let people travel, and we let people go to such exotic places as Kenya or Iran even. I'm not sure that's a good idea at the moment, but we do have a factory there. And Malaysia and so on. And these people that had only been in the lab for 20 odd years, now they can go to these places with some support to be able to build their experience. And that engages people. We put a PMO in place to manage all the projects. And the system, we want the system to be fast, so you can go through gates 1 week at a time if you want to, or you can go through gates 6 months at a time. In Coro, in 2015, we had 4 projects. 2018, we got 60. And we launched 23 new things last year. And this is a vision board of a pipeline, and 11% of our revenue came from innovation last year, and we're accelerating. And the final bit is that we've now committed to building this, which is to put all of the things that I'm talking about into a habitat. So we're going to build this center. If anybody drives past, you'll see there's a big hole in the ground with some concrete in it, so we have started. We're going to move in Q1 next year. And the key point is that innovation, this bit here with the labs and all the stuff, all the secret stuff that when I was at Coke, you had to scan like 3 times to get into, it's here, it's in the middle. And this cutaway here is marketing department and commercial. They can look over into innovation. And anybody can come down into innovation as long as they're wearing the right PPE to get into the different zones that we have. And the idea is that we engage the wider workforce. So we want it to look and feel like this. There's obviously, I don't know if you can see this, but there's going to be robots and people with shopping bags. It's going to be marvelous. And so what we want to do is we want to attract talent, because we know we're a little Danish company, maybe none of you have heard of. We need to attract and retain talent. We want to be as good as the best. So believe me, that facility can do anything, more or less anything that Coca-Cola or Suntory or PepsiCo can do. But it just happens to be in a place where the weather's not very good. So the summary is, you know, as you're building your innovation structures and as you go back to your businesses, you know, you want to try to get the companies to take risks, to reward failure, as Paolo was saying. Simplify processes, but you do need processes to launch things. So I'm not saying get rid of processes, but you do need some processes, but just be mindful that some processes can be so complicated that you just can't do anything quickly. Remove barriers. Say that innovation is for everybody, for the cleaner, for the cook, for the innovator, for the EVP of innovation, and for the people in accounts and everybody else. Encourage dissent. I love it when people come up and argue and say, I think that was rubbish, what you just launched, because of these reasons. Because people feel like they've had a say. You get what you ask for. So if you're a CEO or an EVP, if you ask for high margins, high volume, high profit, you won't get innovation. And you can argue with success. I put some references at the back of the presentations. Some of the slides I've taken out for the public one, but you can have a look at these and some videos and stuff. The only book that I will really recommend is Messy, which is the first one there, because I think it's a fantastic book for anybody that's in innovation. And that is the summary of our journey. So thank you very much.